So Cyrus, today we're going to talk about a very small issue, and that is our brains and what technology, including AI, might be doing to them. And as we kick off, I want to start with a story that is stuck in my head. It's from a Radio Lab podcast from, I think, 15 years ago that I think helps explain where I'm coming from and what I'm thinking about as we approach this topic. So the story is from a professor of cognitive science named Lera Boroditsky, who studies how language shapes thought. And years ago, she was spending time with an indigenous community in Cape York, Australia. And this is a community that has a language that does not use right or left as directions, but instead uses cardinal directions. And so instead of saying, it's your right leg, they would say things like, there is a bug on your northwest leg. And instead of saying hello, they would ask, what direction are you traveling? And so Boroditsky, this cognitive scientist, when she got there, she was literally lost. 5-year-olds could tell her exactly where Northeast was, and she was like, I have no idea where Northeast is, and goes around like this for a week or two until one day she realized that a new window had opened up in her brain. And she described it as a module, that this module opened up in her brain, and suddenly she could see the landscape in her mind of where she was and herself on it. And every time I hear it, like as a little dot, and every time I hear that, I think about the module on my phone, which is Google Maps, that I am constantly looking at with myself as a dot. But fascinatingly, she had this in her brain. And I have thought about this for 15 years for two reasons. So one, I have a terrible sense of direction and I am deeply jealous. Do not ever ask me for directions. I cannot tell you the number of times that I have tried to tell someone where to go. And then after they were out of my sight and I couldn't do anything about it, I had told them to go right when they should have gone left. And I apologize to every single one of those people. I did not do it on purpose. And then secondly, not necessarily about me, what I am fascinated about that story is the extent to which our brains do what we ask of them. So if you are taxing your brain in such a way that you really have to focus on where you are navigationally, what is north, what is south, what is east, west, and all the different directions that your mind can adapt. And it can adapt throughout your life. And I think it's obviously clear, right, that technology, that AI is shaping our brains in many ways and shaping them in ways that we don't expect. And so we want to talk a little bit about how we're using them and also how do we think about this in a policy sense. So I'd love your reaction to that story and also what is on your mind, Cyrus, as we talk about how our brains are being shaped, whether we want them to be or not.
No, I think that's a great way of putting it too, because what happens with me in Google Maps is that Google Maps takes me somewhere, and if I go there enough times, I'm just so used to driving in the city of Chicago. So it's a grid, right? So in grid mapping, you look at landmarks. So this McDonald's, that Starbucks, right? Those things become your landmarks, and you remember, oh, this is how I get places. And so my brain with Google Maps, after a while, it kind of maps itself. So I kind of understand that part of it. The thing I'm experiencing right now is that like AI has moved from like a novelty thing to like infrastructure now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the ability to create like whole toolkits and workshops and do whole processes. And, even for the show, I created a teleprompter, right? Like just little things like that, that back in the day you had to know tons of lines of code, and it was a process that created discipline and rigor. Like that has now been like flattened down, and I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because I do think that some of these tools are super powerful, and where our landscape is not there yet, right? In terms of our cybersecurity, our knowledge of what is fake and what is real. Like our educational system is not set up to like prepare people for a world where you could get perfect email, looks just like Bank of America, sends you a link, and now your whole entire account is compromised, right? So I think with our brains overall, we're just conducting the largest uncontrolled experiment, right? And as we know with social media, it took a decade plus for us to realize, oh, that's not a great thing that we're just swiping all day and like everything is reduced to whether or not I get enough likes, and like that has an impact on our self-esteem. So
Hmm.
it is good that I think we're looking at this subject now, and hopefully others are starting to think about this as well.
So there's both sides to this, and I think where we are, which is a really dangerous place, is people using these technologies and using AI in particular, and also thinking about AI applications in school without knowing what should be offloaded and where that benefit is and where the potential risk is in terms of what people can and can't do. I will say that whenever I am working on something and I'm stuck and I put it into Claude, I found that a lot of times I'm doing that because it is just hard and I need to think it through. And then I end up getting more frustrated because I just want to be able to put this problem into this computer program and have it spit back the answer to me. And then, of course, it can't spit back the answer to me because it's the hard stuff. And we are just not at a place yet in deploying these tools where we really understand where the value is and where the potential risks are.
Yeah. And I think it also like because we don't do enough in our educational system to help people understand what type of learners they are either. Like
Hmm.
I realized I've grown into being an observational learner. I was much more of a hands-on learner when I was younger. Like I
Mm.
needed to get in and do it and understand it, right? And then as I went, I've kind of been able to now look and uh, and I think a lot of this came from I could not find a mentor in the work that I was
Mhm.
doing. So I always had to observe people from afar and take the things from them that I wanted. And that's very similar to AI, right? Like
Mhm.
is in another sense kind of an ability to kind of take from the things that you want to kind of offload, but you have to understand, as you just said, kind of the trade-offs, right? So maybe I am offloading more of my writing, but what I'm gaining is more of a knowledge skill set because what AI is bringing back to me in terms of the materials for writing, when I actually go through that, I've cut down the amount of research time I have. I'm
Mhm.
getting more time to actually understand the topics so that I can ask the AI better questions to get a better product on the other end. So there's still a learning loop that happens there. But I think the problem is like, if I'm doing that now at 42, I've been at the White House, I've been at the Department of Homeland Security, you know what I mean? I've had so
Yeah.
many different jobs, I've done so many different things that me offloading that now versus when I was in my 20s is a totally different trade-off that's happening.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a real trade-off. I'm fascinated by this research that shows that if you first try to get to an answer without help, even if you get to completely the wrong answer, your learning outcomes are going to be better than if you just jump to having someone tell you the answer.
Yeah.
And so there is a real benefit in this process of struggling through something, even if you end up struggling through to the wrong answer. And that's what I think, in learning, and I'm really conscious of in my use of these tools is, am I using the AI just to get to the answer or just to get to the outcome? And allowing myself to avoid that really beneficial but really uncomfortable struggle.
Yeah. So and so that's such an interesting angle on it too, because I look at it, that's what this comes down to usage, right? So for me, it is an equity tool. I don't have, I think the ongoing resources enough to have my own standby lawyer, my own accountant, my own, all these things that help you keep maintaining wealth in your household and all those things. But then also, I don't have the ability to have like an expert pollster on staff or these things, right? So oftentimes, like what I find myself doing is creating agentic helpers that help me do the things that I would normally have to go and have somebody paid to do, or have
Mhm.
somebody in my network that's willing to do it for free and give me that information. And then I could go check it against people who really understand, right? Because oftentimes, right, because AI is only as good as your understanding of the information that it's bringing you,
Yeah.
right? And so there's still a limit, especially when you get into new subject areas or new processes or new things that you're not aware of. So you're still going to need some outside expertise. But I believe that it's kind of been an equity piece for me because I've not had to have the same amount of capital to have the same amount of supports that somebody else would
Hmm.
have, in my position. So
Yeah.
I do think though that education has to catch up on this conversation though, because the way our educational system looks now in terms of the read and regurgitate is completely out the window. Like it was already heading out that way, but now it's like completely out the window. As we've talked about before, critical thinking skills, hyper socialization, the ability to understand empathy, like the things that this administration is trying to strain out of society are like exactly what you need to be successful in this next society, because understanding where people are, how people think about something, and then being able to create prompts and create systems and supports for those things is going to be where I think the future of entrepreneurship is going. I think it's going to be the future of where, because I'm trying to get both my kids to have like a business in high school, because AI has
Hmm.
made that so much more possible for them to create a digitized, fully digitized business that takes pay systems and everything else, where they could sell candy at a digital vending store. They can do all these different things that were not available to us. We could only go work at the mall or something like that, right? Which took
Paper
physical,
route.
yeah, exactly,
Right.
paper route, something like that, mow lawns. So that's where I see like the opportunity for them to be business owners in high school is such a revolutionary piece. But the process of learning AI is where I've been struggling in terms of
Hmm.
how much of these tools, how much of this stuff do I expose them to? Because I do think it takes away the incentive to learn it in our current system, the way it's
Hmm.
currently constructed.
With kids, it's interesting, sort of like what does it mean for them? I think that on the regurgitation point, something that I have seen really interesting is I'm not entirely sure what's going on in the math curriculum these days in elementary schools, but I do know for my daughter that even though it's not necessarily part of the math curriculum, there's been a real focus on memorizing multiplication tables like
Yeah.
we did, which I think really went out of vogue for a while. And part of the reason for that was, yes, you can do the multiplication table faster on a calculator. But there is a value in having this base level of knowledge
Yeah.
that kids or you can work off of. And I think that was really key to your point. I think one of the things that holds me back from using these tools more is that I can have it do the data analysis for me, but if I don't have full understanding of what the analysis is, what the underlying data is, what the history is for the particular topic that I'm looking at, then I can't really trust the output because
Yeah.
it can, because right, it's really good. We've had this conversation with Claude where sometimes, or ChatGPT, or I'm not going to name any particular tool because I think they're actually
No
all the
disparagement.
same.
Yeah.
And this is no disparagement. This is basically any AI tool that I've used that no matter how well I prompt it, at some point it sounds like a really overconfident 24-year-old male business school major. And like there's just this tone to it that's like, oh, this is just like your stereotypical bullshit artist. And and so I think there's a real risk there, right? Because you're getting something that is spit back to you that sounds incredibly confident and seems really sophisticated. But if I don't have a knowledge of whether it has any basis in reality, it's hard to use the tool, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the big thing. So I always treat it like staff. Like
Hmm.
when I had, when I was working in government and I had a team, they would send me stuff all the time too. And I was at the end of the review chain, right? So it was my job to sit down and review what they sent me. And the same questions I would ask my staff is the questions I ask the AI about products it produces for me, right? So
Hmm.
I'm asking, hey, where'd you get this information? Or is this the most up to date information? Or why did you make this analysis gap leap here? Like, and the funny part is like now I've got it so trained, it'll speak back to me like, oh, yep, I overstated that. Let me go back and look at that. I should rewrite that. And we're like, okay, break it down to me and make sure I understand that you understand what I'm doing, right? So if you're not using the tool at that level, like I think it's easy to kind of fall down the rabbit hole of like this, like all of them the same. But I do think that there is differentiation that can be made because there are just open source platforms that people have made that allow you to do things like create video cuts that I've never been able to do on my own. Right? I would never be able to figure out how to use Remotion Studio. There are ways in which you use coding. Like I've never used my terminal on my computer more than I've used it. in the last
Mm,
couple, last year actually. Cloud code, all these interactions, and it's not teaching me coding. It's teaching me the logic model of coding, right? What do I need to set up in order for this to be successful? And so what I'm doing, I think, in a lot of sets is rewiring my brain to a new way of processing complex information. Because I know that the system itself can do the task, but I have to give it the task as I would that confident 24-year-old business major who doesn't know a lot about the real world still, right? And
mhm.
needs those real world touches on it.
Yeah, there's a few, I think, points we should make to anchor this conversation. So, first of all, based on data I've seen, the average user of AI tool of Claude, ChatGPT, et cetera, is making over 100K a year. So right now it's being really intensely used by people who are already doing pretty well in the economy. And so I think that's an important anchoring point. I think another one is if you look at data from the Census Bureau, the actual adoption of AI and its actual use in businesses far lags what the conversation that you see in the typical media outlet today would suggest. It's pretty far behind. It's a relatively small share. The adoption is going up quickly, but it's still fairly low. And so I think that you have a lot of bias here towards the fact that the people who are in the media who are reporting on AI are also the people who are using it the most, right? And so we need to sort of keep that conversation in check. But I do think from a
We're also under the
policymaker's.
greatest threat from it too, though,
Well,
because
right. So that's why,
yeah,
right? Because here I am in my well-paid knowledge work job, and I see how this tool could really be impacting me. And I think it's less so when I talk to folks, it's less impact on them, so people who are roughly our age or older, and more on their kids because they look at the path that they had, they look at what's happening to college graduates now, they think about what's going on in school and are worried about, okay, is my kid going to be able to have the same pathway into labor market that I did? So I think that's an important angle on this. But I think for policymakers, I think there is incredible pressure right now to both focus on AI and to orient a lot of solutions towards AI. And I worry that it's not being done with a real understanding and a real eye towards the research and development that's needed to use these tools well and to use them in a way that is, as we've talked about many times, going to get to the outcomes that we actually want. There's a whole movement of getting every kid a laptop, putting a
right.
laptop in every school. Now you have pushback against that for, a lot of really legitimate reasons. And you don't want the adoption of AI tools in schools in training to just be another one laptop per child
Yeah,
story.
yeah. No, I agree with you. I think for local policymakers, because here's the push, right? The reason I think you're also seeing these stories now is because unlike with NAFTA and other kind of economic revolutions that have happened, the media has been really late on letting people know
Hmm.
the potential dangers of it. And I think there is a concerted effort, one, because they're also impacted by it, to warn people now of the coming potential calamity from this, right? Because there's still an opportunity for us to change course. And the nervousness you're seeing, like plant after plant after plant of all these like data centers are getting closed down, are getting shelved because the public pushback to it, right? And that is for a local policymaker where the rubber is going to meet the road because on one level there is a need for these centers. Two, they're probably going to bring some level of jobs. But
Hmm.
because there is no national or statewide or countywide framework, it makes people feel comfortable that the potential downside risk of this AI and the implement of these data centers on their heating and electric bills and all these other things, that you're not going to have any public confidence. And that's where we're kind of at in the story.
Yeah. But I think the housing is a great example because I'm sure there is a benefit, right, to being able to design things faster. And, as AI, as I understand, is getting better at that, but architects and planners are not going to be out of a job
Right.
anytime
That's
soon,
the,
given its
yeah.
visual capabilities. But what I worry about is the reason that we don't have enough housing is not because of a problem that AI is likely going to solve. It's because of interwoven policies around
That's the thing. Yeah.
zoning, around, community pushback that I have seen in my own community about building bigger apartment buildings, building in a way that's not just single family houses that are accessible only by a car. And so I think where I'm going is one, we don't understand how AI is impacting us. There are things that it can do, but that's very different from things that we want it to do. I really like writing. I love writing. It's one of my favorite things to do. I do not want the AI to write for me because I just feel like I lose so much. I would really love a robot to fold laundry for me, but as I understand, that is not coming anytime soon. There's this data on women in particular, and I'm not stereotyping because I will say that in my household, my husband does most of the laundry, but a lot of the folding. But there's this pushback, I think, from certain circles on AI. And I think a lot of this comes down to what people are automating it to do versus what they would like it to be automated to do, and that those are two completely different things. And so I think that is something that we don't want to lose sight of. But for policymakers, I think there's this real risk that this is seen as something that can be used as a quick fix to a problem that doesn't actually fix the core problem. It's just the shiny new thing. It's this new tool. We're going to implement it. We're going to implement it without the right research and development. And 10 years from now, we're going to have a whole host of regrets like we did for a wide range of technology in schools or other policies, you name it.
Well, this is the thing is the application for policymakers, I would think, on any level should be around the policy review level, right?
Mhm.
Because is super time consuming to do one, to bring all the agencies' policies together to figure out where they like
Mhm.
overlap and where they're creating bottlenecks and where they're constricting ability to move forward on things. This is a perfect place for AI to help you find those bottlenecks
Mhm.
where you're having potential loggerheads because of policies that aren't working the way they are intended to. And then from there, it's about the human conversation of like bringing the right agencies in the room. And that's the hard part, right? Like, as we all know,
Mhm.
is bringing the right people in the room and creating that consensus. But I do think it's a lot easier to do when you can actually identify the real direct policies. And I had to do this in New York City, but we did it. It took us a year and a half to go over 7 agencies' policies to actually have them break down to look for where there are potential
Mhm.
bottlenecks. And because we had the right people doing it, and this is not something that's available to everybody, we were able to kind of get through it. And we also had like another office kind of help us. They were like our AI, right? It was like an office
Mhm.
quants and others to dig through the
Yeah.
data. But this is where I think policymakers need to think about what are the processes that we don't take on and are tedious, but when done, help us to really identify core problems and move forward and help them solve them. And I think this is one of those areas that it can do really well in because the information is out there. You're not asking it to create anything new. What you're asking it
Mhm.
to do is to take a look at that information based on your goals and to ask what are some of the limiting factors on our goals because of that.
I mean, I think there's for state government, right, a lesson learned for anyone who has had to encounter the scourge of online AI customer support
Oh,
bots right now. I mean, they are just like the bane of my existence. And
yeah,
every single time I go on to some company's site and I'm looking for help, and I realize that it's going to take me 10 layers to get through to the actual person, it just makes me want to never deal with that company again. And I think, for government, right, like some people who are taking the really malicious view would say, like, well, there are some people who don't believe in government. And a great way to reduce trust in government is to replace government employees who we might criticize, who are fallible humans, but are generally trying to do their best, with an AI chatbot, I guess, that is, maybe half the time giving you the wrong answer or unable to deal with your problem. And so I think in all of this, as we've talked a lot about before, these tools need to come from a place of understanding what they can and can't do. It needs to be matched with actual investment in researching what the outcomes are. and with an eye towards what is the human outcome you want to achieve, and is the use of this tool actually achieving that? And is actually saving the money or the time that you think it's going to save? And I think right now you're going to find that in most cases, it's probably not. Not necessarily because the tool itself couldn't do it. A lot of times it can do the task, but it cannot yet perform the task within the systems that we have set up. And it may never be able to, right?
Right.
Unless we replace humans entirely, I guess, with robots. So, one thing that I didn't mention is that there's interesting research on navigation and the way your brain functions that have implications for public health. So apparently, there's research on London cab drivers, as you may be aware, very famously have to pass this impossible test where they essentially have to know every single street in London and how to get places. And so they are absolute master navigators. And research has shown that they have less likelihood of getting a certain type of dementia than other people like them, dementia and Alzheimer's, which the reason for it is because building up this capacity to navigate builds up your hippocampus, and that has this protective function against certain types, not all, but certain types of cognitive decline. So I'm definitely not, in that sense, protecting myself against that particular risk of cognitive decline. But where that takes me is that there are unintended consequences. There are consequences of using this technology that we are not thinking about and that we need to track. And we've learned a lot of lessons about our uncontrolled experiment with social media and young people. And I hope that we don't repeat those same mistakes now with even more powerful tools. And I worry as, sort of look at the research on people using chatbots as friends and for social connection, that there is a risk of that happening. And so, to that GPS study, we know that because researchers looked at it. We made the investment in understanding, how what people were doing, the tools that they were using were impacting their brains and how they go about their lives. And we need that investment too. And we've both been in government funding that research study, funding, that analysis always feels sort of like the last thing that needs to happen. But it does need to happen. And it's not happening at the federal level now. And so that is a place where I hope that states and cities, hopefully in partnership with universities and other researchers, can step in and can step in a coordinated way. Because otherwise, 10 years from now, who knows what the conversation is that we will be having.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely feels like there's a fire sale going on in terms of like we're being sold off to the highest bidder. Like, right now it's AI. Who knows what will be tomorrow? But there isn't a lot of protections in place. And I think the first place you can protect is in your home. And I do think that what you're hitting at in terms of navigation, like make sure you're doing the things that have been native to humans since our inception, right? Like navigation has been something we've had to do. Getting outside, moving around, walking, sunlight, sunshine,
Mhm.
being in nature. All these things are going to help you and your family understand like how to stay grounded and rooted as things get crazier out there. And then I think for the overall systems that we're talking about, um, you and I both have been a part of, I think, in the study space, like commissioning studies, setting up these studies. But what I think what we're going to have to do as leaders, especially like lawmakers, when I'm thinking about lawmakers, governors, and policy legislators, are going to have to start thinking of how do we remove some of the barriers to getting some of this stuff launched faster? Because
Mhm.
one of the biggest barriers oftentimes is like just your processing and be able to get a commission study done from the city. It just took so long in New York, it would just not be worth it. So we end up doing it
Yeah.
in house, and that would even take longer because we had to take people's time to do it. And so these things aren't going to move fast enough unless, like you said, we prioritize them one, we fund them, but thinking about how we're removing the barriers to these things being done in a way that the information can actually be used for
Yeah.
decision making, I think is one of the last points I want to make.
Yeah. That is definitely the subject of a whole other podcast on how do you actually get information to policymakers from research studies that they can use. I have lots of stories
Yeah.
on
Mhm.
the good and the bad. Um, so, so we can maybe we should end it there. I will say that as we are here on this digital platform and talking about digital tools, in my life, I am definitely doubling down on in-person experiences, and I think we're going to see a renaissance there. And so,
I
with
agree.
that,
Yeah.
I will say goodbye and tell you it is a beautiful day in DC today, and I'll be going for a run in Rock Creek Park, and that will, other than this podcast, be the highlight of my day.
Awesome. Great.
All right, thanks, Cyrus.
Thanks.